In this episode, Dr. Juanita Cox shares her research into the Windrush scandal in its transnational and Commonwealth context. Welcome to Sankofa Pan-African series. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee. Don't just subscribe to this channel. Turn on your notification button, share our videos, and check out our website, sankofastorybooks.com, for history, Afrocentric stories, and other resources for children. Welcome once again, Juanita, to the Sankofa Pan-African series. What is the focus of your research? The Windrush scandal in its transnational and Commonwealth context, and why is it necessary?
It's a 3-year funded project that's really aimed to provide some sort of scholarly examination of the Windrush scandal within a fully transnational kind of framework. And what we hope is that this is going to give us the opportunity to consider the agency of a wide variety of official and non-official figures from both sides of the Atlantic, including the role of kind of post-colonial and Commonwealth context in terms of international relations. And I think it's really important for several reasons. I mean, for example, one of the things it's showing is that there are a lot of people who've been locked out of the UK. So one of the things within the British press, it's very much talked as though it's a problem that just affects Black people in the UK. But what it's not showing is that people who actually traveled overseas on holiday, or who traveled, say they had a grandparent left in Jamaica who's elderly and they felt the need to go and look after their parent because their parent couldn't come here, those people, when they tried to return, were locked out and they weren't allowed back in. So there's actually a large number of people over a long period of time, several decades, that traveled overseas, totally assumed they could come back, only to discover they couldn't. So we're really trying to shed a light on a lot of areas of life in which that has been affected by UK immigration policies. Policies that have basically been invisible to people within the UK. So that's one aspect. I guess the other thing is that the interviews are going to kind of explore the extent to which, you know, the kind of complexities and ambiguities of the law that governs nationality, to look at how that exacerbates confusion around competing notions of British and Caribbean identity and belonging. I mean, obviously, the whole thing has had a really terrible impact on people's sense of who they are, where do they belong, you know, and actually all of this is really bad for society as a whole. I mean, if you want a society to function well, you need people to feel like they belong.
Yeah.
And you also need to make sure that you are not preventing them from being able to be useful contributors to the society. So it's those sorts of things. And finally, I'd say one of the things that's coming out of the research that perhaps is unexpected, for me in particular, is that it's not just Britain. It seems that Britain, Canada, and America have at different periods of history been deporting people back to the Caribbean who, for all intents and purposes, have felt like they were either British, American, or Canadian, and have been brought up in the school system. But in being sent back to the Caribbean, where they no longer have family or relatives, many have fallen ill, you know, had mental health challenges.
It's located. It's
exactly. Exactly. But it's
where
also,
do you start?
Well, exactly. Where do you start? And also, it's destabilizing those countries because they're small countries. You only need a few people with mental health problems for it to really have a very wide impact on the overall society.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's really crucial work you're doing. So what is your approach to this important research? Who are you collaborating with?
So we're there's 4 of us working on the project, and we're all taking different approaches. So my primary approach is, you know, I have a very strong academic interest in oral history. So my particular approach is to conduct oral history interviews with survivors of the scandal and also with their advocates, people who've supported them, like lawyers, church elders, charities, activists, community elders, those types of people, but also
You've been
MPs.
working closely with a June Elizabeth.
Yes, so
Yeah.
June Elizabeth, yeah, June Elizabeth is an amazing
I know.
lady.
I know.
Um, and she's very smart. I have to say, I really like her because she just works voluntarily in the community, but
It's
she has been
amazing.
campaigning for decades to raise people's awareness of the need to register as British or naturalized, but also she's been helping people with their compensation forms. So she's precisely the type of person that I interview because on the one hand, you've got the government who've gotten rid of all responsibility, thrown away their responsibility, don't care that these are people who are settled, British for all intents and purposes. And if it wasn't for people like June Elizabeth, I have no idea what would have happened to those people, except that they probably would have been deported.
Yeah, and her background makes her such an incredible asset. She was a police, she was in the police at one time, worked in nursing and all of that. She must be a great asset.
She's a huge asset. Yeah, she's a huge asset. You know, so she's very good at being diplomatic and ensuring that she has the best interests of people in the community at heart.
What are you hoping will come of your research findings?
At a very sort of basic level, um, we want to ensure that there's a permanent record of this episode in British history from the perspective of the people who've been impacted. And that sounds like a very simple thing, but ordinarily speaking, we don't hear the voices of Black people in this country. You know, they're silenced. You know, we have no idea as to the actual experiences they have. And so and normally we just hear about, you know, the perspective from those people who are up there, you know, the government, those in charge. And I think what this research fundamentally does is it shows how the current legislation wasn't properly thought through. You know, and it shows how inhumane that legislation is, and why it's so important that the government, when it is thinking of bringing in legislation, that it works with the community, that it takes its time over actually working out who will be impacted and in what ways. So beyond it being a permanent record, we also want to make sure that it becomes it informs government policy, and yeah, I mean, I guess that's the main thing, but also so it's looking at reform. You know, how can we thinking about what needs to change in order to make sure that other people aren't impacted in the same way as the Windrush generation have been. But the other thing is also because one of the terrible things about the way British history is taught at the moment is that it just doesn't even accept it's the inextricable relationship it has with Black history. And the reality is that Black history is British history. You know,
Black
particularly
history is world history.
it's world history, and Britain, in having had an empire,
Empire. Yeah.
will never be able to extricate itself from that, and actually won't understand its own identity if it doesn't face up to the consequences of empire and colonization and imperialism and slavery.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so that's where we want our research to then feed into you know, the teaching materials that people have available to them, both in university but also within secondary school level.
Oh, good. So
Yeah,
accessible enough for people.
absolutely. In fact, from my perspective, I am not even I mean, my colleagues are kind of more focused on the academic side of things. I'm very much a community orientated person. So I don't see any point in writing about anything in an inaccessible way.
Mhm.
So it's really important for me that everybody has access to it. And it's also important that in a way that, whilst I've been going around doing interviews with individual people, that I
Mhm.
bring all that information together and then return it to the community. So it becomes a really important resource for the community. And so that it may even help inform how they think about the issue of reparations. You know,
Absolutely.
because with the Windrush scheme, they've had to compensate people for what they did wrong. And there've been lots of problems associated with the way that's been implemented. And I think it would really helpfully inform the way that they the activities that they run around reparations as well, and the demands that they make about it. And I mean, the big takeaway that I would say from the Windrush scandal itself is the Home Office created the problem, but it's also the Home Office who's deciding how much compensation to give people and under what circumstances. And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, the perpetrator is not the person who should be deciding
No.
how or what they give the victim. I mean, it's ridiculous. And we see a similar thing emerging with reparations, whereby, say, for example, certain families have been emerging out of the bookworks, where they're saying, oh yes, our families were involved in slavery. We feel guilty about it, and we would like to offer you, and they're choosing who,
Yeah.
this amount of money. Well,
Mm.
hang on a minute. How is it you get to choose how much money
How
you
much?
give and who you give it to? Seems you are the ones that, your families were the one involved in it.
Please share some of the lineup of presenters and presentations at the conference that you're planning to take place on the 19th of June.
I forgot to mention that June, we have Windrush Day now in the UK. It's on the 22nd of June.
Yeah.
And this year it's the 75th anniversary of the arrival of Windrush. So
Mm.
a lot of people are commemorating the arrival across the whole of June. So hence our conference is on the 19th of June. And we've got various panels. We're looking at the long history of the Windrush scandal. And that's important because most people think the Windrush scandal is kind of, as I was explaining earlier, it was triggered by the laws brought in from 2012 and onwards. But actually, what our research is showing is there's been many pieces of legislation long before that that had been creating all kinds of problems in the community, but that nobody had recognized. Nobody realized, oh, why is that individual being deported? Or why is this person missing? Or,
Mm.
so we found actually there have been all sorts of things in place since 1948 to minimize the number of Black people in the country. So that's something we're going to be discussing on the panel. And we're also looking at anti-deportation campaigns because we want to highlight the agency, the resistance within the community, their resilience. And then we're going to be looking at international diplomacy, UK Caribbean relations, as well as talking about the future in terms of reparations and what justice looks like. What is justice? And so we have a very nice wide range of people coming.
I hope there'll be people talking about this madness, this arrangement, so-called arrangement with sending people to Rwanda.
Oh, I have no doubt that will come up. I mean, to be honest, we're all a little bit like, are we dreaming at the moment? Is this really reality? Because the idea that a Home Office, a woman who herself comes from an immigrant family is now saying, oh, yes, we're going to be deporting people to Rwanda.
Championing it, yes.
And yes, and she said it will make me happy. My first flight to Rwanda, I'll be happy.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's crazy. It's totally crazy.
Yes,
But yeah, we have some really good speakers from Amelia Gentleman, who was the investigative journalist who was the first person really to identify that this was a problem affecting the Windrush generation.
Mhm.
We have some of the some really good activists joining us. So a lady called Stella Dadsey, and she's basically known for her involvement in the Black women's movement here in the UK. She was actually a founding member of the Organization of Women of African and Asian Descent in 1978. And her organization was really key in helping people during that period and, you know, the 80s and 90s with their citizenship statuses and all the problems around changing legislation. We also have Martin Ford, who is one of our best Black judges here in the UK. And he was also involved in the design of the compensation scheme. But he's now become a very staunch critic of it because it hasn't been implemented in the way it should have been. And yeah, all sorts of other people. Professor Gus John, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's an absolutely staunch, amazing social justice and human rights warrior, you know, and but also people like Arthur Snell, who is a foreign UK High Commissioner to Trinidad and Tobago. Because people like that give really interesting insights into how the government was changing the way it viewed members of the Commonwealth. You know, I mean, he himself has actually talked about, you know, he said that, well, he actually revealed the way that control was taken out of people who work from the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office and moved into the Home Office, because the Home Office sees those high commissioners as having, and I'm using his words, he said they'd gone native, you know, because they were helping people in territories outside of the UK to resolve their citizenship status. And obviously the Home Office didn't want that to happen. So they've now taken power away from those areas and have taken full control. And over the, you know, when you ever think about the Commonwealth heads of government meetings, they've actually been really critical at different periods of history. I mean, I remember Sonny Ramphal. I don't know if you remember Sonny Ramphal when he was the head of the Commonwealth, in charge of the Commonwealth at the time, and he did a lot of work against anti-apartheid in South Africa, and was very successful, you know. And then with this Windrush scandal, it was actually because of the Commonwealth heads of government meeting in April 2018 that they demanded Theresa May apologize for her behavior. And they are the ones who actually forced it onto the political agenda. So yeah, it's the Commonwealth plays an important role, but I don't think the British themselves, if they're honest, they probably don't like them very much.
So this conference is taking place on the 19th. For those in the UK and who want to be a part of it, how can they?
It's a free conference. Unfortunately, if you're not in London, you won't be able to see it or attend because we're not doing it as a hybrid event. It's an in-person event. But if they want to join, they can go to the Institute of Historical Research's. Just Google Institute of Historical Research, and include Windrush scandal in its transnational and Commonwealth context, and it will come up immediately. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, obviously Windrush Day is a day when we're commemorating as well the contribution of the community. So rather than just let the conference be this kind of thing that looks at the negative experiences of the community, we're ending the conference with an evening event called Remembering the Ship in Citizenship. And we have the renowned playwright and poet John Agard is going to be reading from some of his poetry. We also have a calypsonian called Tobago Crusoe, who's well known for his brilliant pieces of writing. So it's going to end on a high note. It's not just going to be all about the scandal. So please do join, everybody who can.
After the conference, what next can we expect from your research team?
Well, I guess I'm quite excited. We're in the process at the moment of building a website where people will be able to see what we've learned. So we're going to be uploading the audio clips onto the website. We're also going to be doing a roadshow where we take all of our audio recordings around the country and share them with, in cities where there are significant Caribbean populations. We're going to be producing a monograph, so a write-up by the end of the project, which is the project ends in July next year, but so we have the monograph to come. The other thing is that we're going to be producing podcasts, and one that is specifically aimed at pupils taking the OCR History GCSE module, which is on migration to Britain up until 2010. But that module, basically, we're going to make sure that they have access to, some of the recordings to the audio as well for students. And then there's also, I forgot to mention, actually, because we have partnered with the Black Cultural Archives, and we also with the British Library. So we're going to be putting articles. The British Library has a web, on their website, there's a section called Windrush Stories. So we're going to be writing articles that we'll be sharing on that website as well. So we're basically using all the avenues we can think of to disseminate what we find.
Awesome. Thanks for watching. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee so we can continue to bring you this series. Subscribe if you've not yet done so, and please turn on your notification buttons. Don't forget to share our videos with all your contacts and keep those comments coming.